Martin, are you there? Are you there, Martin? Right, Martin, we're getting a lot of feedback in the room. Sarah and Jenny have got microphones turned off on their laptops, so I don't know where it's coming from. I want laptop. Yeah. Yeah, that's all right, yeah.
Good morning, Martin.
Sarah, are you okay? We're doing your stuff. Yes. Are you all right now?
Is that the printer?
No problem. Thanks, Martin. We were just making sure I knew what I was doing, but that's fine. I'll come out of that. No problem. Brilliant. Thank you.
And it's nice to get in the echo. You don't have this idea what to do. It's driving me crackers. I've got to wait for it to come down on the next visit from fire. That's what she is. Yeah. Are you still all right? Yeah, actually. Is it?
welcome to the January 2022 meeting of the Planning Committee. Members will be aware of the absolutely ghastly news that has befallen the ex-chair of this council and his poor wife. I don't think it's appropriate today to have a minute's silence because at the moment we're not quite sure where things are at. We do know that, to the best of my knowledge, that ex-councillor Ken Walker is still fighting for his life in Queen's Medical Centre. But obviously our thoughts are very much with the family members and all those who've been severely impacted by the ghastly events of last Friday night. So I'm sure you want to share my thoughts that we're just thinking about them all at this absolutely ghastly time. Thank you very much indeed. So now, if I may, I will begin the meeting by asking, first of all, if we've had any apologies for absence, please.
I've not received any, Chair.
Apologies for absence. Or an apologies for absence, right? Okay, that's fine. Does that mean you can't see me? I'm heartbroken. I'm gutted. I put my gold tie and special suit on. And this is the best you can do for me. Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to carry on. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, so if we move on then to I have no urgent items of business this morning. So if we move on to item 3, which is declarations of interest in any item on the agenda today, Councillor Paul Cooper. Yep, so under item 5, Councillor Paul Cooper has declared an interest, and when we get to item 5, Councillor Cooper will leave the meeting. Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Do any other members have any other declarations of interest they wish to declare? No, in that case, we'll move on. Minutes of item 4, minutes of the meeting held on the 7th of November. They're pages 3 to 12 of your documents. I'm happy to move from the chair. They're a true record. That's been seconded by Councillor Adams. All agreed? That's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. And now we'll move on to item 5. So, Councillor Cooper, would you please take your leave? So item 5 is application number 21/00619, outline land east of 22 Apple Tree Road, Stanfrey. And I'd now like to invite the planning manager, Sarah Kay, to take us through the application. And in your packs, members, that's pages 13 to 41. Sarah, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So there is just a brief presentation to accompany the presentation for item number 5. As you just introduced, this is in relation to planning application 21/00619 OUT, which is an outline application which has been submitted for the erection of up to 2 dwellings, with all matters connected with that outline planning application reserved for later approval. It concerns the land that's located east of number 22 Apple Tree Road at Stanfrey, and the proposal is for Chapman Developments Limited. So on the display screen, you can see there, I'm just showing the site location plan that's been accompanying the planning application submission, just so members can understand whereabouts the site sits in relation to the village of Stanfrey. So it's actually located sort of the northeastern corner of the sort of settlement of Stanfrey. And it's where the junction of Church Road and Apple Tree Road actually turn at a 90-degree angle to go back to the main road. Church Road is a small narrow track lane that runs off in a northerly direction, and you can just see that the application site is outlined there in red with the indication of where 2 dwellings might actually sit on the application site. For reference there's an aerial image of the application site itself. That's taken from a Google image of an aerial photograph. It just shows the application site relative to the other properties in the surrounding area. You could just get a feel for the fact that it's obviously surrounded by open fields, but there is a fairly defined curtilage to the application site itself. So you can see there the trees and the hedgerows that are actually positioned around the application site. Accompanying the application is an indicative site layout plan that shows how the 2 dwellings might be laid out on the site where it's subject to gain outline plan permission and come forward for a full detailed proposal. As I say, it is indicative at this moment in time, so we are considering only the principle of development for this particular planning application itself, but that does just show how you might position 2 properties on this particular site and also gain access onto Church Road, so how they might actually have a driveway formed for parking, etc. This generally gives members a feel of how there's sufficient space around, and the application site is of a sufficient space itself to actually accommodate 2 dwellings on that site if it was to gain outline permission. Accompanying the application as well are some indicative street scene drawings, which would show how the site might appear if it was subject to a later full permission in place. This shows how 2-story dwellings, detached dwellings, would be positioned on the site. And this actually reflects the fact that the site has quite there is a slope from the southern end of the site down to the northeastern corner of the site. And obviously any layout and details that might be the subject of later reserve matters approval would have to obviously address those site layout changes, those site level changes as well, as part of the details that we would consider at a later date. Here are just some site photographs for the benefit of any members that weren't on the site visit that took place last week. As I mentioned, what we're looking at here is the entrance point in the lane of Church Road. So it is very rural in nature. You can see it is a fairly sort of narrow single track road with obviously grass growing down the middle. So it's not in particular frequent use. It's a typical track you would expect to see in a rural countryside setting with hedgerows along this sort of the eastern boundary of the application site. The Church Road at this point actually goes off the outside edge of the corner, so visibility from the site entrance and from Church Road at this point is pretty good in both directions, and that is something that members will need to be aware of in terms of the considerations that are set out in the officer's report. The next 2 photographs are actual details that look into the application site. So we're stood on the lane track at the moment, just looking into the site to the east. There's actually a static caravan positioned on the site at the moment that is in a very poor state of repair. That's been there for quite some time. So obviously we would see that removed as a result of this development proposal. But what you can see from these 2 photographs is the hedgerow obviously along the edge of the site access track, but then the mature trees along the eastern boundary of the application site that essentially form the edge to the countryside. It would certainly be our in the best interest of biodiversity, etc., to keep those trees and actually have them form the eastern edge of any gardens if we were to accept this proposal. And that obviously just allows a balance of biodiversity. So that's something, again, we'd consider at a more detailed reserve matters stage. One thing that I did say to members as we were out on the site visit last week, and a point that I think is worth raising in this meeting as we discuss the merits of this proposal, is to do with the extent of the adopted highway. So rather unusually, the extent of the adopted highway actually goes quite some distance along Church Road, where it is that single track. So members will probably be more familiar with seeing adopted highway, so highway that's maintained at the cost of Derbyshire County Council to be blacktop tarmac surfaced with pedestrian footpaths and things and white lines or double yellow lines. But adopted highways can take other forms as well. And actually the adopted highway in this instance of Church Road actually leads all the way up to the application site boundary. So that track is within the control of Derbyshire County Council, so they are responsible for its maintenance. So from our perspective, we are happy that the application site shares a boundary with the adopted highway, so the site can be accessed without relying on third party or private land. So that's just something that was worthwhile pointing out for members. In terms of the report itself, I'm not going to go through it in any great detail. You can see there in the agenda pack that on page 22, there are the main considerations for this particular application. As I've said, it's an outline proposal, so we're only really considering the principle of development. A key point here for members to be aware of is to do with the fact that Stanfrey itself is a village that's located outside of any defined settlement boundary or development envelope. So it's a village in the countryside. Now, we wouldn't normally accept new dwellings in the countryside unless they meet the qualifying criteria of one of our specific policies, which is policy SS9. And one of those criteria is to do with whether the site has been previously developed. And this is a point that's been made in the application submission, and it's a point that we looked at whilst we were out on the application site boundary with members last week on the site visit, and it's something that myself and the case officer has also looked into in a great amount of detail. The site did used to have cottages on it in the past, and there's historic maps within the officer's report that show whereabouts those buildings actually used to be, and when you stand on the site you can actually see the foundations of those old cottages. So it is, for the purposes of that policy, regarded as previously developed land. That allows it to be redeveloped because it's a site in the countryside, but it allows it under policy SS9 to be redeveloped. So that's the key principle that members need to be aware of. All of the other considerations include things to do with the landscape and the visual impact of the proposals, whether the proposals will impact on any other residential amenity of the neighbours in the surrounding area. Can the site be provided with safe and suitable access? How may that impact on the local road network? Things to do with biodiversity considerations. So we'd probably be looking to retain the trees and the hedgerows and make sure that there is certainly a biodiversity gain where we can be in terms of allowing the site to be developed, but making sure that there's a biodiversity gain secured there as well. And also coal mining legacy issues is something that's also set out in the officer's report. Just jumping back to that discussion in relation to the highways, we've had a bit of a long discussion with the county council on this particular application, getting them to understand and agree that the extent of the adopted highway means that the site can secure itself an appropriate access. There's been discussions with the Highways Authority about whether the track should be upgraded or potentially resurfaced or made wider at varying points. And we've set out in the officer's report how we think that can be secured. There's a discussion about the provision of passing places, but actually when you stand on the site and look at the edge of the junction where it joins Appletree Road and going back to the application site, there's things like that that the Highways Authority have potentially asked for that we don't think are necessary because the intervisibility between the junction edge and the application site is very clear. And you'd actually be eroding the nature, the character of that track, just on the basis that actually you've got a development that's probably only going to have maybe at most 6 cars. The frequency of the use of that track, we don't feel justifies the upgrade extent that perhaps the Highways Authority were initially asking for. So we've reached a compromise with them on that. And therefore, we're fairly happy that in terms of our recommendation to members, we feel that the development proposals are acceptable. They meet the requirements of policy SS9 in terms of them being previously developed land. Through any application that came forward for later reserve matters approval, if we were to accept outline today, we'd be able to control what the development looks like, the layout of the site, the retention of the trees, etc. So that's something that would come at a later date, but we think we can preserve those things. So we are recommending to members that the application is approved. That's in accordance with the recommendation set out on page 34 of the agenda pack through to page 39, possibly 40. Just let me jump to make sure I've got to page 41. That includes all of the conditions that we're also setting out and recommending as well. And just for members' information, those conditions have been agreed by the applicant and the agent as well. So they're in agreement with the conditions that we want to impose. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Sarah, for your report. Do any members at this stage have any questions? Yes, Councillor Clifton.
Thank you, Chair. Were we able to get clarity, Chair, on the possible having to declare an interest due to elected members, and as Councillor Cooper's an elected member, do we need to declare a non-pecuniary interest, Chair?
Jenny, can you advise, please?
It's not necessary for members to declare an interest just because they know the member that's declared the interest. As long as you've not got any other interest that you need to declare, then that's absolutely fine.
Thank you very much, Jenny, for the clarity. If nobody else has got any questions, just would like to say myself and Councillor Adams and Councillor Clifton were present at the site meeting, and we all felt reassured that all of the things that might have been issues have been covered in the report and covered by the actions taken by Sarah and her team to ensure that the site is an appropriate site for the proposed development. And for that reason, I think without further ado, I will move from the chair the recommendation as set out on page 34 and ask for a seconder.
Councillor McGregor.
Thank you very much indeed. Does anybody wish any further comment? Right, all those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. Can I just now pause the meeting and are you going to the members' room to fetch him? Oh, thank you, Alison. He's in the Labour members' room. So just through Pam's office. Right, if we can carry on then, please. Agenda item 6, which is the report of the planning manager on the conservation area appraisals. So over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. So this is actually a follow-up report from the last planning committee, which we held just before Christmas. If members will be familiar, we reported a series of conservation area appraisal documents to members, and there was one recommendation within that report which concerned the Elmton and Cresswell farmsteads, where we had to actually go back out to advertise an extension to that potential that conservation area to the public and invite people to make any comments. So this is just an update report to follow that previous recommendation to say we have been out to consult the public on the proposed extension to the Elmton and Cresswell farmsteads conservation area. That's to include within the conservation area Highwood Farm near Whitwell and Frithwood farmstead, which are two smaller farmsteads that would join that collection of the Elmton and Cresswell farmsteads conservation area That's having assessed those two farmsteads individually, we think they actually have some local townscape character that should be added to that collection of conservation area farmsteads itself. The purpose of going out to public consultation was obviously to consult with the people who own properties within those boundary extensions to see if they've got any objections or any concerns about them being included within a conservation area designation. We wrote out to them in November, gave them the period of time to come back to us, which was the majority of December, and we haven't received any objections. There were a few discussions with people just for information, but no objections have been received to the conservation area extension. So the report before members is put forward with a recommendation that members accept the addition of those two farmsteads into the Elmton with Crestwell Farmstead Conservation Area. It'll be known as extension number 1, and that's the recommendation. So we're seeking from members to approve that that's the final part of these conservation area appraisals updates. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Councillor McGregor.
Yeah, it's straightforward as far as I'm concerned. It's a sensible thing to do, and I'm very pleased, and I would move the recommendations.
And I'll second them. Thank you very much indeed. Anybody else wish to speak on this item? All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. If we can move on to the next agenda item, which according to me, if I jump the page just a minute. Agenda item 7, which is the update on the Section 106 agreement monitoring, which we normally have Chris McKinney with us to speak, but Sarah's happy to take this. So over to you, Sarah.
Again, thank you, Chair. So yes, this is the quarterly update on Section 106 agreement monitoring. As you say, the report's been prepared by my colleague Chris McKinney, but he can't be here today. So I'm just here essentially presenting that report on his behalf. But the report includes the very familiar picture that members will be aware of, where we bring to you any updates in terms of Section 106 contributions that have been received and that are therefore now with various departments to be spent, and also any details where we actually have any triggers that have been met, where we need to be chasing developers for payment of those triggers, and also if there are any particular sites where we've got any undue concerns about contributions potentially not being spent or us getting very close to the trigger date when we actually should have spent those monies before we have to then pay the money back to the developer, which we don't really ever want to be in a position where we have to do that. So there's just really one on the report that I want to bring to members' attention, and that is in connection with the GP practice contribution for Tib Shelf. That has a trigger of needing to be spent by August of 2022, so August of this year. Yeah. We are working with the CCG, the GP practice. They have a very lengthy approval process going through Public Health England, etc., to get to the point where they have an agreed strategy to spend that money on an extension to Tib Shelf GP practice. We are almost there. There's some complications about them not wanting to take the money until the financial year when they would actually spend the money. So that will be April of this year. So we're working with them. We're definitely happy there's a strategy in place and a proposal for, already in the pipeline for spending that money. But we just want to make sure that they obviously aren't caught out with this trigger coming up very soon in this particular year. So we're working very closely with them. We're comforted that we're there in terms of making sure they will spend it within the timeframes, but it's just one to be aware of, for members to be aware of in terms of that trigger coming very close. But I think that's probably the only one that I really need to bring to members' attention. Any questions at all?
Do any members have any questions?
Councillor McGregor, move the report.
Thank you. Report's been moved. Does that receive a second? Thank you, Councillor Kane. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. Moving on to agenda item 8. So the report on the one updating on one. Oh no, I've got the same one twice in my papers. My apologies. So the next one is the. Let me go back to my agenda because I've read the report, but I've read it on mod.gov. My apologies. So agenda item is appeal decisions. Sarah, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So, yep, you'll be familiar. We report back on any appeal decisions we've received on a 6-monthly basis. So This is just for members to be aware of the appeal decisions we've received July to December 2021. There's only been one appeal decision received, and that is in connection with a certificate of a proposed use, so a lawful proposed use at a property in Broadmeadows near South Normanton. So a certificate of proposed use is essentially the developer coming to us to say they think that the use they want to use the premises for actually falls within a lawful use or a lawful use that can be changed under the freedoms of permitted development or the use classes order. So they were essentially saying to us they wanted to operate a children's home from this property that used to be a residential property. So that's known as a C3 residential use. So your usual dwelling falls under use class C3 that allows a house to be used for occupation by a single household. We took the judgment with this one, given that they wanted to occupy the property with 6 children that needed one-to-one care on a 24-hour basis. There would also be nurses, support workers, delivery staff, etc., attending the property, as well as the 6 children living there with the one-to-one care as well. So we felt that went in excess of something that would be regarded as a single residential property. That's more of a care institution, sort of a care home in our opinion. So we refused the lawful certificate. It was appealed. The inspector agreed with us and the appeal was dismissed. The inspector also took the same view that the use did not fall within a C3 use class. And they also felt that the operation of the use in the way that was described in the application would constitute what we would say a material change of use. So essentially we were supported by the inspector in our judgment, which is a good one. So as I say, the appeal was dismissed. So there's no real learnings to set out for members in this one because it went our way. So that's always a good thing. So thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm sure members have read this report and would want to share with me our gratitude to the skill level and expertise of all of our planning officers of the whole of your department, Sarah. And I think I'm sure I speak for everyone, we'd like you to pass on to the team our gratitude for the way in which they carry out their tasks and their duties so diligently, the result of which is that we have one of the lowest rates of appeal being upheld, I would have thought, across the entire country. And I would appreciate if you could pass those thanks on, because it's a tremendous achievement. And with that, I'll move the recommendations.
Councillor McGregor, second.
Thank you. Any further comment, anybody? No, all agreed? That's lovely, thank you. And so finally, we've got the local enforcement plan update, Sarah.
Thank you. So, final item on the agenda. Again, it's just the usual local enforcement plan update. Must get those words in the right order. They mean something different. As members will be aware, we have a local enforcement plan where we set targets for how quickly we will investigate planning enforcement complaints that come to us. That enforcement plan sets out how we categorise high, medium and low priority cases. And that then dictates how quickly we aim to get out on site and actually start those investigations and reach a conclusion. You'll be familiar that this report used to come from the Principal Enforcement Officer, and the last one I think came towards the middle of 2021, which was the update to the final, to the end of 2020. So this report concerns all of those performance figures for the whole of 2021. There's a series of graphs which I'm sure members will have had a look at, but in terms of sort of the long and short of it, we are still within our service targets. We perform incredibly highly in terms of actually visiting sites very quickly. And I'd like to say that if there was any instance where there is any slippage, there's certainly an explanation for that, which doesn't put the council at risk. Perhaps with this one, I would like to point out we've got one high priority site which wasn't visited within the 24 hours that we would normally visit a high priority site. That's because we were already familiar with the application site. It was a listed building in Barbara that we're still working with with that particular interested party on. So there was no risk to the council or to that property or to that listed building as a result of that site not being visited within 24 hours. I think we were there within 2 or 3 days, but we knew about the history there anyway. So Unfortunately, things like that do start to skew the figures, but I'm certainly happy in terms of our performance. What I would like to say to members, you'll be aware that the Principal Enforcement Officer, Richard Scott, actually left the authority in December of last year. And I'm pleased to say that Richard's post has now been filled on a secondment basis by the Enforcement Officer, Jonathan Gaynor. So Jonathan will be stepping up to take on the Principal Enforcement role for the next 9 months. So again, I know members had a very good working relationship with Richard. And I'm sure you all know Jonathan, as he was a component part of Richard's team anyway. So please do treat Jonathan in the same way you did with Richard. Jonathan will be there and more than happy to help any members with any questions. And hopefully the service performance will carry on tracking the way that we were under Richard's guidance and supervision previously. So hopefully that's in terms of the update for this report. What I also want to point out in terms of the local enforcement plan, it was a document that ran for a period of 3 years. So we approved it as a committee, I believe, in March 2019. So it's due its update. I'll be bringing that back to planning committee at the next meeting. So it will either be February or March, depending on when the next meeting actually is. I'd be interested to hear from members whether you think that we need to make any changes to the medium, high or low priority categories, or do you think it's working well based on the reports that we've brought to you in the past in terms of how the service is operating? Again, just any feedback from members would be welcome that we could perhaps reflect in that plan or the update to that plan. I think it works incredibly well. I don't think we need to change it too much. But yeah, just I would welcome what members have got to say about that.
Thank you very much indeed for the report, Sarah. Duncan, did you want to come in?
Yes, Chair. This report highlights and supports and underpins the comments that you just previously made regarding the previous report. This department has excelled, in my view, in its work case. I see no reason why we would change the way that we're operating at this moment. But of course, if members do have isolated instances where they got concerns, what they do is they come and see the officer, have a chat, have a discussion about it. That would help the local ward member with any issues that they feel that they needed to be looked at. And I just think it's indicative of the previous occupant, Richard, who was an excellent officer for this council, really good. But the young man that's taken his place, I'm very confident that he would train properly, he was looked after properly, and I just think it's a credit to the planning department overall, the way that the service they provide to the residents of boards of the district council. And with them comments, I would certainly move the recommendations.
And I'm more than happy to support entirely the comments made and to second the recommendation. I just wonder if it would be possible for us as a planning committee to ask for a letter to be sent to the former Chief Enforcement Officer, Richard Scott, expressing our gratitude for the service he gave this authority in his role and wishing him every success in the future. Is that possible? Are we permitted to do that?
Should be doing that. I'm sure they all would agree with that. In fact, time to come
So
back.
if we could ask, and if that could happen.
Tell him I want
that'd
him back.
Thank you very much. So all those in favour of the recommendations, that's lovely. Thank you all. And that, I'm afraid to say, disappoint you terribly, concludes the business of the planning meeting. Can I thank Alison for her support, and Jennifer and Sarah, and wish you all a very pleasant rest of day.